Welcome to the Abbey Road Observatory. I'm your host, Jim the Filter Guy. I'm just brushing up on a little bit of my partial differential equations while I was waiting for you to show up. Today's video is all about astronomical filters. I've put together a 4-part video series all about them, starting with part 1, what are they? That's what we'll talk about today. But before we get into that, if you are enjoying the videos that I'm putting together, why don't you hit that like button down at the bottom of your screen? And if you want to stay up on everything the ARO is doing, hit subscribe. Alright, well let's get going with part 1 of Understanding Astronomical Filters. What are they? Welcome to part 1 of Understanding Astronomical Filters. What are they? The Understanding Astronomical Filters video series has been organized into 4 parts. In this video, I will cover what they are and how they work. In part 2, I discuss how to select and use filters. In part 3, I will discuss special filters such as for solar observing or optics correction. And in part 4, I will present some advanced topics such as use with high-speed optics and extremely narrow-band filters. So, without further ado, let's get started with part 1, what are they? Here we see a lovely image of a mountain valley, rich in detail and contrast. Unfortunately, more often than not, something gets in the way of us capturing the view we want. This is where a filter comes in. Their purpose is to block light we don't want to see. By doing this, we can improve the contrast and sharpness of our view, emphasize specific features in the scene, or help enhance faint details that would not otherwise be visible. The general appearance of a filter is shown at the bottom of the screen, both in photo and schematic form. They are very simple, really. There's a machined aluminum housing within which a flat piece of glass fits. The whole assembly screws on the end of your eyepiece or the nosepiece of your camera, depending on what you're using. It's pretty straightforward, but the secret is in what that piece of glass is. As I mentioned, the filter's purpose is to make darker in the image the wavelengths of light you don't want to see. Doing this helps you to see the other parts of the scene more clearly, but it does not make them brighter. It only makes what you don't want to see darker. This is achieved using 2 different technologies. One is absorption of the wavelengths that you don't want to see, and the other is reflection. Some filters actually use a combination of both absorption and reflection, but let's just ignore that fact for now. Thus, for all intents and purposes, we are essentially dealing with 2 types of filters. The first type are most commonly referred to as planetary filters, which are in essence color filters, commonly identified using the Raton numbering system. These filters are all absorption type. They block light by absorbing it. The other type of filter goes by several names, including deep sky, nebula, or light pollution. Regardless of the name, these are all interference type filters. They block light by reflecting it. I will explain more what I mean in a moment, but first let's take some time to talk about special filters. There are filters on the market that combine both absorption and interference for very specific applications, such as planetary observing, chromatic aberration correction, solar observing, and UV-IR blocking. Although these are very useful filters for amateur astronomy, let's leave them for a later video. Instead, let me give you some examples of the sorts of things filters can do for us on planets and deep sky objects. First, consider this view of the planet Mars. This is what it looks like to the Hubble Space Telescope. From our vantage point here on Earth, the view is not quite as nice. Our atmosphere hides details from view. We can, however, add a color filter to improve the view. For example, adding a red filter will darken greens and blues, increasing the contrast. Similarly, using a green filter can enhance the visibility of other parts of the planet's surface. The same is true of a blue filter, which can enhance the view of clouds and polar ice caps. Another example of what filters can do applies to deep sky objects. This is an image of the Flame and Horsehead nebulae taken from my backyard with no filter. Although the deep sky objects are visible, contrast and detail are poor. Now add a light pollution filter, and you can see a marked improvement in the scene's contrast and detail. Getting back to how filters work, consider this graphical representation of an absorption-type filter. These filters consist of dye-infused glass, or a colored gel that is sandwiched between two thin layers of glass. Molecules in the dye are designed to absorb some wavelengths, but not others. The result is a filter that can selectively block light, but in a rather imprecise way, in broad bands with gentle sloping cutoffs. By the way, if you were wondering where Ratten numbers came from, the numbers you often see associated with color filters, they come from Frederick Ratten. He was a British inventor and co-founder of the first photography company. He devised a standard catalog of filters for use with terrestrial photography. He and his partner, C.E.K. Mies, sold their company to Eastman Kodak in 1912. Kodak still manufactures Ratten color filters to this day. Interference filters are rather different than absorption filters. They are made by adding tens to hundreds of extremely thin alternating layers on a glass substrate. Each layer is made from a material with a different refractive index. As a result, at each boundary between layers, light partly reflects and partly refracts. By carefully choosing the thickness of these layers, it is possible to have all the reflections of undesired wavelengths out of phase with each other, so they cancel out, allowing only the desired wavelengths through. Interference filters made more than 10 years ago tended to be sandwiched between two layers of glass, similar to early color filters, because the refractory materials they were using at the time were relatively soft. Now the materials that are used are much harder, even harder than the glass substrate, and do not need to be protected. For the next couple of slides, I will describe some commonly used terminology, the first being the idea of a spectrum. A spectrum is a qualitative and quantitative visual way of presenting how well a filter transmits light at different wavelengths. The example spectrum shown here is the typical format for presenting filter spectra, with wavelength on the horizontal axis and percent transmission on the vertical axis. It allows for easy comparison between filters and provides information on how the filter will perform in different situations. The next term to discuss is luminous transmissivity, or percent LT. This is essentially a measure of generally how dark a filter is. On average, what percentage of light is getting through. It is calculated based on the specific sensor the filter is to be used with. So a filter will have a different percent LT value if used with the human eye versus with a camera. For whatever reason, it seems that the value of percent LT that you sometimes find quoted on manufacturers' websites, especially with color filters, is the value for daytime human eye use. For those interested, the actual calculation of percent LT is simply an average where the filter transmissivity at each wavelength is weighted by the sensor sensitivity at the same wavelength. The next item I'd like to go over is some basic filter nomenclature. This filter spectrum plot is for something called a low-pass filter. All the light at wavelengths below the cutoff are passed and all those above are blocked. The opposite of this is a high-pass filter, where all the wavelengths above the cutoff are passed and those below are blocked. If we combine these two spectrums together, we get a band pass filter. In this case, a wideband pass. This spectrum type is defined by its center wavelength and its band width, also referred to as its full width half maximum. The full width half maximum is literally the wavelength width from one side of the band to the other, with the cutoff wavelengths placed where the transmission value is half of the band's maximum. Bandpass filters can come in any width, from wide to narrow. It is also possible to have more than one passband. This, for example, is a multi-narrowband spectrum, which I will discuss more in Part 2. The idea of multiple bands can be taken to the extreme. With filters that have so many passbands, they are sometimes referred to as comb or notch filters due to the shape of their spectrum. I refer to these filters simply as multi-broadband. Well, that's it for Part 1. I've given you a really brief introduction to filters, how they work, why they work, etc. Hopefully you have at least come away with the knowledge that filters are a useful accessory to have in your amateur astronomer toolkit. The nuts and bolts of how you are to choose a filter and how to use them properly is what I will talk about in Part 2. If there are any questions about this video, please feel free to add a comment below or send me an email at the address listed in the channel description. If you like this video, please press the like button. To stay connected to what the ARO is up to, hit subscribe. Until next time, this is Jim the Filter Guy, signing off.